Welcome back to Dusting History. As I promised, I'm doing another one of my daguerreotypes today. This is Rembrandt Lockwood, who was a painter and sculptor from Newark, New Jersey. Complete hipster, fantastic name. Alright, this is actually a bit of a challenge because there's a lot of damage. There's a lot of those scratches in the very middle of the frame on top of his collar. It takes a little bit of thinking and research to work out what should be under all those scratches. So after a bit of a levels adjustment, I've gone into neural filters to the photo restoration tab and turning everything down except for scratch reduction, which I put up to 100. I'm just going to run that, and you can see it does a great job of taking a lot of the original scratches away. Now going into Topaz Photo AI, I'm not going to do too much here. I'm just going to let it run and sharpen up some of the details a tiny bit. I'm being careful here not to overdo the scratch reduction or the over sharpening because I don't want to impact on any of the detail on his face. You can see it's just crisped up the image a tiny bit. And it's also brought some of the fine little dots and spots into sharper relief. It makes it easier to paint them out. There was another picture of Rembrandt here that I also found, and I thought there might have been a chance I could extract some detail from it, but there was very little information in it. You can see when I exposed up, it was lower resolution and really didn't have anything of any benefit. This actually made me realise I should have done a shadows adjustment layer on the main image, which I do right now. You can see how his forehead and the side of his face is very blown out, so by building a new layer and doing a shadows adjustment layer, I can drag out some of that facial detail, and then putting a mask on that layer, I can just paint that in on his face in a few different areas. I didn't like what it was doing to the whole image. It can actually make the image look a little solarized if you go too hard with that, so I was pretty gentle. Now looking through the other daguerreotypes that I've downloaded, I was trying to find a piece of jacket or a piece of sleeve or anything that I could actually cut and paste. So using this guy here, I thought I'd use a bit of his jacket. And now I just need to line it up roughly with Rembrandt's jacket and then mask out the areas I don't want. Now it's a fair bit paler than his jacket, so I'll also put a levels adjustment on that little wedge on that layer and adjust that down so that it sits more into the picture like that. Now rather than paint out all these scratches, I'm just going to use generative fill on these two areas. They are fairly soft focus, they aren't very important, so I feel comfortable just inventing some rough fabric folds that just help me along the way. Now onto the parts of his clothing I don't really know much about. Looking at some of the other daguerreotypes, I've kind of come up with this plan here that I'm sketching out for you, which shows roughly what I think the collar should be doing. So I found a daguerreotype here. Can't work out if this guy's Tom Cruise or Benedict Cumberbatch or a mix of both, but he's kind of got that look. But he does have a bit of jacket and a collar that I quite like. So copying that and pasting it down onto Rembrandt's, I can start to adjust the collar, the piece, and try and make it fit. For this I'm just using the transform tool in Photoshop and the grid option, which is the little checkbox on the top menu there that has like a little distorted grid icon on it. So I'm only going to get this roughly in place. I don't actually need to get it all the way there just now. It actually took me a while to sort of get anything half decent there. Then a little bit of grey to try and blend it into the colour of the felt, but here I'm using puppet warp to get a final position on it. Now distorting it and then distorting it again is going to make the image blurrier every time you distort something or resample something. It's not ideal, but I do come back later and put some more grain onto it. So while that may not be his collar, the alternative is to have nothing there or just leave the scratches, and I don't really think it matters that much, so at least it's of the period. Now, using the patch tool, I'm just going to select a couple of areas that have been bugging me, like this bottom corner here, and copy and paste the texture from elsewhere on the image down to that layer before I get the remove tool out and start to refine. Now, as you can see, my remove tool brush is very, very fine when I'm around his eyes or any areas like that. I'm trying to be as careful as I can that I don't destroy any of his character. Again, using the patch tool just to try and copy and paste some areas. You can kind of see what it does is it takes the color of the area underneath the patch, and it takes the texture of where you move the patch to and combines the two. It's actually a really good tool. Using lots of patch tool, lots of remove tool, or any kind of clone brushing, anything I need to try and remove a lot of the damage. This is also a high pass filter, a frequency separation tool. That's something I've covered in other videos before. I'm really hammering through this because it's not super important. All I'm really doing is flattening out some of the lumps and bumps of the background. And also some of them on his clothing. You can see in this blurry one, you can see those large dots of pale color, and I'm using a straight up brush and sampling color directly from the image and just painting so that I can flatten out some of those areas. Then with the high frequency pass of the frequency separation turned on and set to normal color, you can see this contains all the high frequency detail in the image. I'm cloning a lot of the grain from one part of the image to the other, putting some of the finer grain into places where there was more coarse grain or no grain. Now, it's very easy to go too far with this, and you'll see that what happens when I finish with the frequency separation part of the restoration, I actually knock it back. I go into opacity for that layer and set it at about 80% because I want some of the original kind of noise of the original image just to come through a tiny bit so it doesn't feel too manufactured. There. Putting a levels adjustment at the bottom of the frame using a gradient to mask it. Again, something I've covered a lot in previous videos. Removing some of the last remaining dots and spots and blemishes. And then I'm saving this out and I'll go into Remini. Remini is an online tool for sharpening images. It uses AI. Not in love with what it's done with the beard there. It does put a lot of vertical lines through its soul for some reason, but it has done a great job on his eyes and his nose and the pores of his skin. And it has also flattened out some of the grain in the background. So I'll bring that back into Photoshop and I'll paint away the bits of it I don't want. I want to keep the original daguerreotype's beard and a few of the other areas of Rembrandt's face that I didn't want the AI to replicate. In fact, the way it sort of changed the eyes a little bit lost some of his character. So I'm painting back just small parts of his eyeballs and the curve of his eyelid to try and maintain the essence of who he was as a person. After that, I go into palette.fm, make a palette that I think is appropriate and bring that back into Photoshop. And then with a color layer above, you can see I'm just painting color and copy and pasting color that I like, moving it around the image. And actually flattening out some of the color in the background. I do like that there's a modulated color in that gray behind him. I don't like the fact that sometimes those things end up as a flat color, so I'm leaving some of that variation. The last thing I do is I find some reference online of a guy who's lit in a similar way. I've actually color corrected the reference to be a little bit more like the luminance level of Rembrandt, and now I'm sampling colors from that little reference image that's been graded and colorizing Rembrandt with that reference. You can see here the color in his hair is not just one color. There's tons of more reddy browns and more yellow browns, and then less saturated browns in the darker spots, and you've got to really kind of match a lot of that up. Also taking care to put some of that warm skin tone around the edge of his hair there to sort of blend the two zones together a bit more. It's a little bit of push and pull, a little bit of experimentation. Takes a little bit of time, but it's worth doing. I do spend a fair bit of time on the eyes as well, putting that little bit of pink into the corner of the eye and onto the rim of the eyelid, as well as the color of the sclera, the white of the eye, trying to make sure that's not too cold a color. It's got a little bit of warmth in it as well. A couple of last things were bugging me. One of them was that this collar seemed to just run out of trim. I'm pretty sure he didn't have a trim on his collar, but I didn't mind the one that I bought in, the fact that it did. So I'm just going to paint a little bit of a suggestion of the extension of the trim. This is all just hand painted stuff. Now once I've finished fiddling around here, I'm going to add a color lookup adjustment layer. And what that is a color space adjustment that actually brings a filmic look to an image, and you can download a number of them. You can see here I'm going to go through some that come with Photoshop, and you can see how they individually change the color temperature or the look of the image. And you can download a ton. You can actually buy packs of these for portraiture or for landscapes, and they're all tuned to represent either good looks or specific camera types. And you can see I've picked one which I quite like. It's just added a tiny bit of contrast and knocked a tiny bit of the color around. I've mixed it back about halfway, didn't want the full effect, and ended up with something I'm quite happy with. So that's another one done. Thank you so much for coming along with me today. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.